thought that we a serpent, bitch. I thought you knew this shit is on when we smoking.
Let's go. Let's get after it. We do it live. We do it live. We do it live. Let's go. Let's go. What's up? What's up, y'all? Let's go. What's up? It's summertime. Tonight we're covering The House That Jack Built. This one is for Jethro, our friend Jethro out there. And this is a Lars von Trier film. It's going to be dark. It's a dark one, but we're going to do our best with a deep analysis of it if we can. It looks like I'm kind of redlining here on the stream. Everybody's on the internet right now on this nice sunny day, so I guess it's nighttime now. But it'll get better in a little bit. So listen, check it out. Tonight we're doing The House That Jack Built, Lars von Trier. This is a dark film, and it's really a retelling of Dante's Inferno, which is amazing. I mean, I really didn't know anything about the film before Jethro recommended this one, and we've done Dante's Inferno. It's a retelling of the film, but it's kind of it's more of an Apocalypse Now redux version of the poem, the epic poem by Dante Alighieri that we've covered here. Go back to my Dante analysis. The link is in the video description up there. I'm really, I'm really proud of that one. That was about a year ago, and we really dove deep into that. It was about a 3-hour analysis, and we covered the Robert Pinsky translation of the Inferno, written in terza rima. So it's the film is complex. It's I mean, I have to say that this is a really dark one. Probably not many people have seen it, but it's worth looking into. I mean, I've also kind of watched it, so you don't have to. But this is like if you were going to make a film and put sort of Dave McGowan's thesis of the serial killer phenomena from Program to Kill into a film. This really kind of fits that mold in a number of ways. It's pretty well done. It's the main character Jack, played by Matt Dillon, is really a Ted Bundy character, and he's supposed to be a sort of a serial killer archetype, but it's really the story of Ted Bundy mixed in with the sort of occult metaphysics that we've heard from Son of Sam from David Berkowitz, and with using Dante's Inferno as a model. And what's really interesting about this film, I mean, it's really well done and it's well crafted. I'm not a Lars von Trier fan or anything, so I'm looking at this one pretty objectively. The last Von Trier movie that I really watched was probably the one with Bjork, which is was I watched it when it came out, and it's so dark. I mean, all of his films are so dark. This one, I've seen a couple other ones since then, but that's the one that really comes to mind. And this one is interesting because it's like it sort of parallels an American Psycho in a number of ways. And kind of not really in its tone, but what you get in terms of the dark humor in it. And it's weird to say that there's humor in this because there are some scenes that are so disturbing in this. But I mean, so disturbing that in fact I knew they were coming in the film and I fast forwarded, especially through one or two of them. But but that's not going to take away from the analysis. Actually, um, I think that it takes Matt Dillon as an actor to really embody this role. And what's crazy is, like, when you look at the still from the film, right? That's Matt Dillon and Bruno Grants, is that his name? He's the guy who played Hotler, remember, in Downfall, and he's also in that movie, The Reader. He's an excellent actor, and somebody brought up in the chat that it kind of looks like Joaquin Phoenix with Anthony Hopkins. It does kinda look like that, and that is interesting. That was a good observation because Anthony Hopkins, of course, is in Silence of the Lambs playing Hannibal Lecter, and that really is also Ted Bundy. And the reason I say that is because Hannibal Lecter, remember, helps, Jodie Mr. Lecter, Doctor Lecter, "You gonna help me, Doctor Lecter?" Um, he helps, Jodie Foster, who should have, in my opinion, been played by that character should have been played by Holly Hunter. But Holly Hunter is really the kind of more authentic version of the actress Jodie Foster in a number of ways. But of course, Jodie Foster in a kind of meta version is also perfect for that role because of her ties to um what's his name? What's the assassin's name? You guys, what's the assassin's name? I got so many names going on in my head. Jodie Foster, the assassin. Remember, she was in Taxi Driver, and that comes after the Reagan thing. So she's sort of perfect to play into that, but that's more of an MK Ultra aspect. This one isn't MK Ultra. This is just like pure occult serial killer. And Matt Dillon, yeah, I was saying that Matt Dillon kind of it takes Matt Dillon as an actor. I think Matt Dillon is totally underrated. This is different from Bob Dylan that we just did the stream on. This is Matt Dillon. And Matt Dillon, of course, we covered when we did The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton. He's in the film. And so, he's one of the Brat Pack. He's totally underrated. He's great. His best role is Drugstore Cowboy. If you haven't seen Drugstore Cowboy, great film. It's Gus Van Sant. We talked about Gus Van Sant also because we talked about him in relation to Henry V. We did a Henry V Henry ad stream. Please go back and watch these streams, you guys, because I think they're revelatory, and I think that we've done so many that are prerequisites for the next work. Like maybe it's worth going back to, but I think it is worth going back to. But so So this one like you can tell this is European cinema because it takes an auteur like von Trier to make a film like this. And we have also covered I'll stop talking about the things that we've covered. But we also covered the idea of the auteur when we did the high concept book about Don Simpson, because Don Simpson's whole MO as a producer was as a reaction to the 70s auteur movement in Hollywood. And Lars von Trier is one of those, he is the auteur. He's one of those kind of characters who makes these films that are outside. They're obviously financed by Hollywood. They're part of the Hollywood system, but they are completely filmed in Europe. I don't even know if he's ever been to the United States. And we're going to see in the analysis of the film that there's a lot of von Trier's own work in here in terms of its self-referential. And shouts out to my good friend Claire out there because she wrote a review of this film years ago when it came out, and she shared it with me, and she brought up that aspect of it. That was it was pretty enlightening to read. So yeah, so the movie came out in 2018, and what's interesting is that even PETA, the animal group, endorsed the film because even though it has this terrible scene in the movie, which I'm hesitant to talk about, but I will later on in the film. Um, they endorsed the movie. They said because it shows accurately the nature of psychopathy stemming from childhood trauma, and so we see this in all. We saw this recently in the Dahmer miniseries, on or the Dahmer Netflix series, right? And where this always gets started with animals and all this stuff and moves into human beings. And so one of the themes in the movie is that this character Jack, and who knows what his real name is. He calls himself Jack. He's got a running dialogue with the Bruno Grant's character in his head. Now Bruno is, I'm going to call him Verge because that's his character's name for the rest of the analysis. And Verge is obviously a play on Virgil, the Roman poet Virgil. And I think it's interesting to go back to the Aeneid because the Katabasis is one of the central elements in the Aeneid, where Aeneas goes down into the underworld and talks to Anchises, his father. He also sees Dido and a number of characters down in hell in the underworld. One of the, I mean, this is pretty faithful to both Dante's Inferno and to the Aeneid. You can't be really faithful to one without the other because the Aeneid takes such a cue from I'm sorry, the Inferno takes such a cue from the Aeneid because it's, Virgil is his guide, his is Dante's mentor going down into the underworld. And there's one scene in particular in the movie that is a small scene, but is really so well done. And it's where they go into the underworld, they go into hell. They're making their passage through hell as they do in the Inferno. And he looks and he sees through a window the Elysian fields. And in the Elysian fields, he sees this group of men who are scything the wheat. And he hears the sound of the wheat. And he earlier in the film, he talks about how when he was a kid, his he doesn't say his idea of, I forget what the language he uses is, but he uses this language that is so important in an understanding, I think, of Ted Bundy, which is the way that sounds work. The auditory sensation drives these people to, Bundy talked about that explicitly, especially in reference to when he was in the car and one of the ladies, what this is tough, but in real life, one of the ladies was screaming in the car, and that was his cue. Like he couldn't take the overload of sound, and that plays into MK Ultra aspects. That's not something we're going to get into in this because it doesn't really relate. But the way I'm going to get into it actually in my next analysis, which is going to be One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which I just tore through today by Ken Kesey, because that is an explicitly MK Ultra book. It's almost an MK Ultra allegory. Remember we did Clockwork Orange and MK Ultra Fable. This is sort of the same way, but it's all set within the universe of like a Bellevue insane asylum, and we'll get into that next time. But the auditory sensation of the electroshock therapy and the way that sounds overload these characters is important for understanding the characters in this. And we hear the sound of the meadow breathing. It's like nature is breathing. And nature is important to understanding this character Jack because he sees himself as remember what Henry Lee Lucas said. Henry Lee Lucas said that he was asked. Remember that boy Henry Lee Lucas. He's a good boy. Remember JD? That's one of my favorite impressions of JD. I love the how Jay's impression of W always starts with this breathing. He's like, well, Henry Lee Lucas. It's so accurate. Henry Lee Lucas is a good boy. Well, Henry Lee Lucas said in that interview, they asked him what it was like to kill someone, and he said, "Well, I'm gonna do it in a W voice. Well, it's just no different than stomping the bug." That's kind of a McConaughey W voice. I don't really want to do a Henry Lee Lucas voice because that's the demonic. But um, yes, he talked about how, taking a human life was no different for him than squashing a bug, he said. So, in other words, nature plays into this because Jack is the serial killer, and his place in his paradigm, in his worldview, is that he is, and we hear this so much, an apex predator. He is the top of the heap, and he's there to eliminate, I guess, as an extension, really everyone. Remember how Bateman, Bret Easton Ellis frames it in American Psycho, that Patrick Bateman talks about. He looks up at the sky and he sees this hellish red cloud of death kind of hovering over the city. How relevant is that, by the way, with what's just happened in the United States on the East Coast and in Canada, right, in French Canada, with the red cloud of death, the toxic airborne event? But this red cloud, this inferno, this scarlet cloud of death hovering over him, which is almost like looking at the inferno from the bottom up. And inversion is going to play a big role in this. I'm trying to get a handle on all the themes because there are so many that play into this analysis. And so he sees himself as this predator that he wants to blot out the sun. And I mean, again, this is so relevant for now with what we hear and what we sort of observe about the psychopathy of the elites and the power structure. Blotting out the sun seems to be a constant motif. And I would say the main takeaway from this film, which is this is so true and so well done. I think one of the things about this film is that Jack, his ultimate aim and the reason that he walks willingly into hell is because that shows that is true, that he sees hell, he sees the underworld as his place in the natural order of things, and he wants to be there, right? He has no remorse. He has no, like, idea of remorse. He's a psychopath in the fact that, in the sense that he can imitate remorse or he can imitate a smile, right? He can imitate natural human emotions, but, he wears this mask of sanity that shows that, like Bateman, he is simply not there. And he is there to destroy everything. In the last scene, it's not really a spoiler because the scene in this that this is taken from right here. This is really great because this is like what I've been talking about so much about great artist steal. This is Dante on the left as, this is Matt Dillon, Matt Dillon as Jack, and Bruno as Virgil. And notice that Virgil is in the guise, or he's in the clothing of kind of a 19th century, I'd say mid to late 19th century, almost psychotherapist enlightenment figure. He makes mention of Goethe, right? 1700s, talks about Buchenwald, and it's almost like he plays the interior psychologist or psychotherapist of Jack, but this is a symptom of his MPD. So he doesn't have DID, he doesn't dissociate in the film. And this is like, it would be easy to take that, I guess, now that we're at that level of the understanding, at least in our sort of circles and our reading of psychopathy and these serial killers. It's interesting that DID doesn't really play into it, but it is a kind of MPD. We see the voices in his head personified in film. And notice also that he is he's wearing a red, like, bathrobe there, but it's weird, obviously, because have you ever seen a red bathrobe with a hood? I've never seen that before. If that's a thing, it's a European thing that I've never seen. Um, and it makes him look again like the picture the drawings of Dante. and he's also in Scarlet, right? So he's the initiate. He's the initiate walking into the Palace of Wisdom, but this is the palace. This is the Blakean Palace of Wisdom, and William Blake is also um, mentioned throughout this book, and what that comes from Proverbs of Hell, right? The road of excess leads to the palace of wisdom, and his excess is all encompassing. It's through murder and death. But the funny parts here are through the absurdity. Like, for instance, the first thing that happens in the movie is we kind of see Jack in media well, we get the sound of him, and this is important because some of the monologues and some of the dialogue between these two characters is played in a with a black screen with the sound of water. And so we immediately are in media res in the upper slopes of hell where Satan finds himself in book one of Paradise Lost, right? Um, lying there. He's in Paradise Lost. Remember, we did the analysis. Paradise Lost. He's lying there on the shores of the lake of fire with darkness. The dark so dark that the darkness is visible, and we see like the kind of shimmering of the dark ocean in the willingness of these people in their of these demons in their pride to be in hell. And so we hear the sound of water running, and I think that that's one thing that is one of the specific images in literature about hell that is so striking and that plays a role in this film. And then we the humor is that we see him in a van um, in a rural part of Washington State. So Ted Bundy again, right? And he's driving along, and he sees a beautiful blonde on the side of the road who's got a flat tire, and this is interesting. This is really interesting because this woman who's played by Uma Thurman, she's really good. It's like she's very brief in the movie. We're going to go through the kind of nine circles of hell in the film, played out through the interpretation of Lars von Trier's auteur vision, and she is almost asking herself. She's almost asking to be a victim. In fact, she specifically um, says to him, "You look like a serial killer. You know, you got the van, you just give off that vibe." And she pushes him, she pushes him, she pushes him. And we, of course, through dramatic irony, know that he is gonna be, but he is like, it's almost too easy for him in this situation. And she needs a jack, right? Get it? She needs a jack to lift up her car, and her jack for her car is broken. And instead of asking like for can you help change my tire? It's very specific how she asked for Jack, and so he becomes Jack, right? And so he picks her up. He doesn't want to take her to the the mechanic, but he's like, it's really weird. He's like, well, we've got a blacksmith down the road. I know a blacksmith, and he can fix the little, knob on this jack or whatever. So he takes her down there. She's berating him the whole time, like she just kind of jumps in his van, and it is total. It is a total serial killer's van. In fact, it's painted, blood red, and it's like empty in the back, but it's got like little pieces for people being chained. It's just one of the crazy things about this movie. It's called The House That Jack Built. One of the crazy things about this movie that he does so well is that he points out that Jack, as the serial killer, lives completely on the surface in terms of he blatantly tells people that he's a serial killer. He doesn't try to hide at all. He's not like Bateman wearing this mask. In fact, he just moves around like he's a complete psychopath, and he gets away with it. And I think this is this is like a completely different look at the way that the serial killer phenomenon kind of like works, in that there's no, I mean, so he's afflicted with a kind of extreme OCD, which makes it, which is useful for him for cleaning up his crime scenes. But like for instance, he'll go in a house and he'll kill somebody, and then he'll just walk right out, like with the body in a tarp, like just right out the front door and put it in the van, and nobody notices. And I think that this is really speaking to what Von Trier is saying, I'll just say the speaker, right? The speaker is kind of the in this film is really our voice interpreting the film, and what the speaker is telling us back from the screen is that um the movie is made or is supposed to be a depiction of this ultimate Nietzschean Thelema will to power, absolute liberation, where people are free to do what they want and nobody cares, including and up to murder and serial murder. So this is the perfect place for a guy like this to thrive. And it's almost like a wilderness. Like it's a wilderness of absolute predation. And the motifs in the movie, like, of hunting, of the most dangerous game, of the tiger, and he quotes Blake, and "Tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forests of the night, what immortal hand or eye could frame that fearful symmetry?" Right? And then juxtaposing that against the lamb, Blake's lamb poem, which is those songs of experience, songs of innocence. So we get this kind of dualistic world where this I mean, he's not so much a Gnostic figure, he's just blatantly satanic, and I was also really stunned by the fact that, instead of this being like a naturalistic, social Darwinist view of the serial killer, there are explicit monologues in the film about dark energy and about what drives him. So, for example, the most telling thing in the movie is when he's talking about photography, and he says that he when he loves taking pictures because they frame the world like as he wants them to be as an artist, because he sees himself as an artist. And we've seen this with what's the guy's name? Charles Ng, and all these people that photograph their victims and all this stuff. Um and sorry, let me put that on mute. And And he is like that, but he's an architect. Notice that he's an engineer, but he's always wanted to be an architect, and that's gonna play into the Hitlerian sort of fascistic elements that are inherent in the film, which is another theme in the film. This is a rich movie. It's complex and rich. And anyway, but one thing he says about photography is that it's not the photograph that makes him see life as he wants it to be, but it's the negative. And so, for example, he shows within that is a kind of there's a montage of scenes showing the negative light, or the negative space, or negative and dark energy involved in some of his vision. And one of those is he looks at the eclipse and he sees the white light of the eclipse, and he puts on like a welder's mask, and he sees the eclipse happening, but it's like the darkness in the eclipse, so there's a dark light, and that's his luminate confirmed. That's it's leading him into this palace of wisdom, of debased, demonic wisdom, right? Which is going to lead him into hell willingly. The other part is the photograph itself. He sees flames. So, like, when he's looking at the picture of the flames, he sees, the colorized flames. But then when he looks at the negative, it's the darkness of there's a dark light. It's the darkness of flames in their outline. And I found that to be incredibly visionary and artistic. And I'm not obviously this is a sick subject. It's a sick these are sick people, okay, folks? These are sick people. Right? We're at war with these people. Yes, but like you've got to understand the pure vision of this in order to get a grasp on it, like, in terms of art, and that is one of the meta things in the film, because he sees himself as an artist, and that is really an extension of if you took so remember we talked about surrealism before, and when we were doing Velvet Buzzsaw and the study of surrealism, if you took surrealism to its absolute ends, then you would get the Black Dahlia, and you would get this. They're like twin pillars of this, because both involve using humans as artistic pieces that are debased into just things, or in this movie are debased into being props, or like just playthings, like in King Lear, right? Um what does he say? We are but playthings to the gods. They kill us for their sport. And he sees it. I mean, he's really, it's like he's a guy. It's like he sees himself as this sort of satanic god lording over his victims in the movie. So it is very, it is very creepy. And I mean, it's really amazing. Like, because that it could be so blatant, that somebody could have the vision to do this, like such a terrible thing well, and to show us these things, but also you you get a feeling that, and when I say well, I don't mean like as in terms of goodness. Obviously, I mean in terms of like absolute badness, but I mean it's depicted in a way that gives us an insight into this thing. And I think it takes art to do that. And that's one of the things in the movie, that it takes art to show us truly what these people, what these characters are like. Um, so, uh, so what happens in the movie? What's the movie about? Well, it's basically the story of this guy Jack, or he's called Jack. I mean, it's interesting that like his character's name is Jack, but we get the feeling that he really doesn't have a name. He's sort of nameless, almost like he's a demon incarnate, and we don't know his name. And the only people that he uses human beings, just like Ted Bundy, and we're going to see that in the analysis. But that he has other character. He has one specific other character in his head, and that his conscience, the way that it's inverted in this movie, I'm still trying to get a handle on this. It's like you have a person, and you have your voice, and then you have your inner voice, and you have your conscience. And in this movie, it's like the subconscious mind is completely pushed to the surface, and that's him incarnate in the movie. And that his conscience is his actions, and that who he should be is like pushed down so that he's arguing with himself, but it's not in terms of a normal conscience, if that makes sense. Because and the reason I say that is because his his conscience actually literally leads him into hell in the movie. So in other words, it's like it's not saying that he doesn't have a conscience. It's saying that his conscience is a negative conscience. It's completely negative. It's negative world. It's like everything's inverted and total negative world. And because of that, because it seems so absurd, a lot of the movie, like there's actual humor in the movie. It's ridiculous. But I think that that also is probably one of the subversive elements in it. I mean, and I say subversive, but it's almost like, is there anything subversive in this movie? It's almost not subversive. It's just there. It's just right there on the screen. I think that, when I was watching the movie, I kept thinking, because of his architecture, I kept thinking of, obviously you think of Freemasons, and you think of, the idea of the grand architect, and ritual, and all this stuff. But one of the things that I kept thinking of was that this was very Hitlerian. There was something about this movie that was Hitlerian. And even though it's set like in the 70s, I guess late 70s in Washington, just so it's, contemporary with Ted Bundy, there was something in it that reminded me of Hitler. And that is what happened in the movie. So there's a scene where he's talking about his ideas of the grand structure, and they show a clip of Albert Speer. And Albert Speer obviously was, Hitler's architect. And you remember that Albert Speer um, was tasked to draw a design of the future city of Germania, right? And the way that he designed it, and they explain this in the movie, is that he designed it such that in 1,000 years at the end of the Reich, it would be beautiful in its ruins, right? That it wouldn't be like when you go around any urban hellscape now and you see things, that were torn down, the beautiful structures that were torn down post World War II, and they were, you got this brutalist architecture instead, and so and then that degrades, and then you get just hellscape city. This is like this is almost like Byronic. Remember Byron talking about, the beauty of the ruins? And that's like a English romantic literary post-enlightenment, romantic ideal of the beautiful decay. And so that is what he does. Okay, so there's too many ideas. All right, let me start over with what happens in the movie. All right, so Jack is the guy. He's the protagonist. He's really an antagonist. who is an anti-hero who's like completely upfront as the satanic negative hero. But he's the protagonist in the movie. And basically he is living his life going through it day to day as a failed architect, so failed artist, as they say, which I think is also part of the propaganda. There's too much made of the failed artist thing, but um but he's a failed architect who's working as an engineer, and we never see him like at work. His work is his predatory behavior, but he's building these little structures, and he basically we're taken through like 10 chapters. I think it's 10 chapters of it should be 9, I guess. Maybe there's 9 and then there's the Katabasis. So that would be the 9 circles. You're probably if you've seen the movie, you're watching this right now and you're going, duh, it's 9. Um, so we're taken through the stages of his murders and his elimination of people. And we see like sort of what drives him in terms of his own psyche. There's no There is no, psychic breaking of mirrors or windows here. Everything is on the forefront. He's already gone. It's already smashed, and we don't even go back to that. And he's collecting his one thing that's different about him, in terms of, like, other depictions of serial killers is that and this is very Ted Bundy, is that he keeps his bodies, in a meat locker. Remember, Ted Bundy kept body parts in his fridge or his freezer, but he keeps his like, "Don't quit your day job. Don't quit your day job. It is what it is." Yeah, so he, but he keeps all of these bodies in a meat locker inside of a warehouse that he owns, and he goes back in and he does weird thing he doesn't do creeper well, he sort of does creeper things with them, but he does creepy things with them, and he stages them, in various things, and then in various like poses and we sort of make our way through the horror of these things, but it's the way that he goes about it that is interesting. And um for instance, there's one scene where it's got Riley Coe, who's Elvis's granddaughter. Remember, we've talked about her before in some of the films, and she was in Mad Max Fury Road. She's one of the girls. I watched that movie again, by the way, last night for like the millionth time. Just because it was on YouTube TV. And it's kind of like that movie The Martian, which obviously it's all fake and gray and all that stuff, but, like, that's one of those movies, it's the Ridley Scott movie, The Martian, when anytime it's on TV, I just, like, watch it, I don't know. It just entertains me. Fat Damon totally entertains me in that movie, and I've seen it, like, a million times. It's because it reminds me of the old days of when you could just turn on the TV, and whatever movie was on, you watched it, and so I don't have to pick the movie, so there's something comforting in that, I don't know. Um but, so there's a scene with Riley Coe, and, she is apparently his girlfriend, and the way that he walks into that scene is interesting because he's all disheveled. It's almost like the scene with Bateman, right, when he gets on the phone, "Stop acting so fucking sad." Remember he does that on the phone? He's disheveled. He's like he's like the rope is kind of fraying a little bit. He's kind of getting out of control in terms of his methods. He talks about that in the movie because he blatantly starts to deny his OCD rituals to sort of see what would happen and to kind of liberate him. But Riley Coe is in there, and this mirrors one of Ted Bundy's relationships, and also the Iceman, Richard Kuklinski, whom he references in the movie. And she, he says that he tells her that he has killed 60 people. He blatantly tells her that. Her response is like, "No, you haven't." And then he says, "I have killed 61 people." And she says, "You just said 60." And he says, "Listen, you are dumb. You're dumb as a brick. Let's just get that clear." And she's like, "No, I'm not." So right there, we see that she is, and this is the reason why she has survived, obviously. And this also happened with Bundy. But he says, "What makes you think what makes you think that I couldn't you wouldn't be the 61st by the end of this night?" Then he says, "Go get a magic marker." And she's like, "What?" And he's like, "Go get a magic marker." This was a little bit of Ed Gein. He starts to like draw on her body, and you can tell that this is like Black Dahlia style. He's going to Man Ray make her body into a body prop and do something with it. And it's going to be terrible. But in the meantime, she runs out of the house and there's a cop downstairs. She runs out of the house and she says, "There's a guy upstairs. He's a psycho killer. Qu'est-ce que c'est? Can you do something?" And the cop, of course, says, "Ma'am, have you been drinking?" And she's like, "Yeah, a little bit." And that's what he focuses on. And then Matt Dillon comes downstairs and he says, this part is pretty funny, actually. He says, this is funny because it's absurd and because it subverts the expectations of the audience. He says, "Everything that this woman has told you is true. It's true. I am this. I've done all these things." He says he's killed all these people. He's a monster. He has no regrets. And it is what it is. And he kind of sits down. And then, of course, the cop does exactly this part is exactly what we know he's going to do. The cop says, "Ma'am, can you get your friend and take him inside? I can't tell you that you shouldn't be drinking, but maybe you should take it easy." And then he drives off. And so they go back upstairs to the apartment and he tells her, this part is like horrific. It's horrific in the absurd. He tells her to scream, and she screams as loudly as she can in the apartment. And it reminds me of that scene in American Psycho, of course, where, he's got the 2 ladies over, the 2, workers over to the house, and then they wake up, remember, and then the lady is screaming, running down the hall, and he's got the chainsaw. And so, of course, in that, it's supposed to be that we don't know, is this real or is this literal or figurative, right? Is this all in Bateman's mind? But because he's one of these elites and he's a corporate raider and he's a hedge fund guy and he's in New York and that the psychopathy plays into that and that this is all figurative because his bloodlust um exists because all of his other senses can't be satiated, right? But is it also literal because the people live in this sort of self-worship egocentric world where they don't even care about sounds? Oh, everything's sort of nothing serious. In this, it's completely literal, and he tells her to scream, and then he says, "Is that all you can do? Scream like that?" And then he screams like her, and then he tells her, "Go to the window." She opens the window, and she screams out of the apartment. We see, the camera backs up, and we see the apartment complex with all the windows in it, and it's obviously this is European, it's obviously Danish, and we see the apartment complex in this, like, brutal hellscape. And she screams, and everybody's doing their thing in the windows, and nobody pays attention. So then um, he makes her pick out her instrument of death and sort of uses her as a prop. He says, "Nod," and grabs her head. And then she picks the knife, and then he kills her. And then the next scene is just like Bateman walking in to the cleaners, right? This is cran apple, right? He's got the sheets. Oh, I can't. What does he say? Uh, no can do. I'm meeting Cliff Huxtable uptown at the Four Seasons at 10:30. Right? We're we're going to see. There's a new musical in town. Oh, Africa, Brave Africa. It's a laugh riot. This is my cousin. She's from France. So in this one, we see him go into the gun shop, and he has Ed Gein style one of her body parts as a wallet, and he just puts it right there on the counter, and the guy doesn't. I mean, it's just nothing, right? It's too striking for these people to understand, or they're too wrapped up in themselves to understand. So anyway, um, eventually what happens in the movie is, and by the way, like the stream, guys, please like the stream, share it, share me out. Go back and watch my stream that I just did of Killers of the Flower Moon. Maybe it's the algorithm or whatever, or the subject matter, but it's not getting as much traction. So please go back and watch my analysis of Killers of the Flower Moon. Where else are you going to get an analysis, a 2 hour plus deep analysis of Killers of the Flower Moon? Which is going to be a major Hollywood film. And as I mentioned on some of the radio shows that I did this week, is highly relevant especially to the events that just happened with the fires. So please go back and watch that. Please, if you want to support the channel, then you can hit the links. The main ones go right to me and are a big help. You can also hit the super chat button, and I'll get to those super chats at the end. Um, so so he kidnaps this guy. He kidnaps an army man, and he's wearing his trench coat, raincoat, drives speedily to his warehouse of death, gets the guy out, says, you can tell the guy's a total psycho. He gets him out, he leads him in, and he makes him kneel down. So they're all kneeling, almost as if they're going to be praying at some sort of altar, or at the altar of death for him. And he's got all these bodies everywhere in the place. And um, he's got like 5 or 6 businessmen who are they've got like some kind of wire. It's almost like taxidermy wire, which will play a role in the movie in a dark scene. But or like piano wire, because remember the story of that was in Richard III, where Richard III has one of the guys in the Ian McKellen film version, where he has the guy eliminated with he's hanged with piano wire, and then he like watches the film of it, and that's supposed to mimic Hitler, because remember Hitler had Ernst Röhm eliminate. He was hanged with piano wire, and it was filmed, and apparently he showed the film to his inner circle after the Night of the Long Knives. Anyway, these guys are lined up, and he tells them almost like he's reading a script. Everything he does is like he's reading a script, and he says there were experiments during that time where on the Eastern Front, the uh, the soldiers and the Einsatz, I guess the Einsatzgruppen, who weren't soldiers, they were just the death squad. But the Einsatz, yes, house that Jack built. The Einsatzgruppen were running short on bullets, and so they would use, their they would basically line up people, and they would try to shoot like 5 people at once, right? And we saw this. Remember, we saw this in that was one of the scenes in Schindler's List. That was one of the terrible scenes during uh the liquidation of the ghetto. They were doing that. And so he says he wants to test this theory, almost like he's a scientist or a psychopathic sciento artist trying to recreate historical events in real life. And he's got a rifle on a stand, and he's going to recreate this thing. And he says, um, he tells him about it, and he says, you can't use ordinary hunting um, bullets, you have to use a full metal jacket. And then you think maybe that the guy, one of the army guy, has saved himself, because he says that's not a full metal jacket. That's and I think that he's been given hollow points. And he says, you know what, you're right. I'll be back in a minute. So then he speeds off to the gun store where the guy who played Faraday in Lost, and who was in he played the coward in Saving Private Ryan, is the gun shop owner. And he loses his mind, because the the nature of control and the OCD elements have now gone haywire, because something has been thrown in where he made a mistake, right? And it wasn't his own mistake. He was sold a box of shells, or he was sold a box of bullets. And he explains the difference earlier in the film about the difference between smoothbore, with shotguns and rifles in the most dangerous game scene in the movie. But he yells at the guy, and the guy's like, you can see he's like clamming up. He's like, why do you? And he's like, just give me one bullet. And the guy's like, why do you need just one? And he's like, I have been a customer here for 20 years. Right. You know what? Just forget it. And he actually lets the guy leave, and he lives, I guess, because he was useful in his methodology. Then he goes off to this dude's house, who is an old man and is supposed to be either he's not the Cyclops. He would be, I suppose, Tiresias, maybe. He's an old man who is one of the archetypes that he's encountering on his hellish Inferno journey. And the guy basically said, is a longtime friend of his or whatever, a hunting buddy who lives in a shed. But he says, you're Mr. Sophistication, aren't you? Mr. Sophisticated? You're Mr. Sophisticated, because because we learned that Jack has been writing letters to the media with the pictures that he's taken of the staged dead bodies, and he calls himself Mr. Sophisticated, which I don't know why is like obviously one of the absurd dark elements in this. It's not supposed to, I mean, it is supposed to be funny, but it's not, but it is. And I'm laughing at it not because it's well, you know why I'm laughing at it. It's just it's ridiculous. It's so ridiculous that he calls him, it's like he has this narcissistic ideal of himself, right? But one of the things actually about the movie is that we all often hear about the narcissistic, elements in the serial killer things, and that is accurate in a number of ways, right? Um, but but not for all of them. And this one doesn't really play into that. He's not. It's not that he's narcissistic. It's that he is, and it's that he's. It's almost like he is the beast incarnate in this. It's not a narcissism, it's beyond a narcissism, if that makes sense. Um, and so the guy's holding like a 357 on him, and he says, "If you move, I'll kill you." And then he one thing Jack does is he's great at like mimicking the human emotions of charisma and seduction. And he's able to charm this guy into saying, "You know what? I'll just have a seat here. I'm not going to move." And then he ends up stabbing him right through the head, right through the chin, and then he puts on his red Scarlet Man initiate bathrobe. And when the cops come, there's only one cop who comes, and he's standing there in one of his own. So now he's an artwork. He's like in his own artwork, and he's posing, and he's dressed the old guy in his clothes. So when the cop comes in, he kind of puts the gun down. He's like, "Good, you got him." Then he turns around and he shoots him in the head. Just like Bateman, remember, goes in back into the building and burning the midnight oil, Mr. Smith, bam, and he shoots him. Right. So then he makes his way back to the factory. And when he gets back to the factory, he drives in the cop's car to his factory, to his warehouse. It's not a factory. I guess it's a death factory, but back to his warehouse. And he leaves the siren running on the car. So I guess that's supposed to be Homeric because it's the siren, right? So it's Odysseus on his journey. Odysseus also goes into the underworld, remember, to meet with Tiresias. So I guess that would be a kind of Homeric section of the mythos in this film. Um, also, I just realized the old guy kind of the scene strikes you that he's almost a father figure, and maybe that's the Anchises scene. Except in this, he kills Anchises, and in the Aeneid, Anchises is already in hell, and he's Aeneas' father, and he goes down there to he makes sacrifices for him, um, prepares his body for the dead, goes down, and he can't remember. Aeneas carried Anchises out of the burning city of Troy. So anyway, I guess that's supposed to be that. But so anyway, he goes back to the factory of death. The siren on the car is running. He goes inside and he sets it up. He says, I got one bullet here. I got a full metal jacket." And he's about to kill the guys, but then he realizes that the architecture of his warehouse does not allow. It's like he can't focus. The scope won't focus because he's too close to the guys. So what he's going to do is like he lines them up here, and then he lines his gun up, here, and he's going to try and recreate um the Buchenwald Tindler's List liquidation scene. But this is the part where it goes into surrealism, the sort of the what do you call this? The apotheosis of surrealism, right? It's like because he opens a door and it opens into another world, and when he does that, he sees his guide, his spirit guide, in the corner of the room, and he reveals he was always there. He wasn't just there in an auditory sense, but he was there, and we realize that he's been in the background of all these mental photographs that he's taken. Again, the photography element was explicit in the film, but it's also figurative because we see the mental images like a snapshot. And he says, he basically he guides him on his great work. He's trying to make his great work for his Ragnarok, or rather his Gotterdammerung, right? And throughout the film, Matt Dillon in House That Jack Built is the name of this film, has been attempting to build a house, right? So remember the thing that they talk about with Hotler is that, when you're looking at psychotherapy at it in a therapeutic sense, people like to analyze Hotler in the sense that his artworks, his paintings, his watercolors are gigantic buildings with no people. So that's supposed to be a statement on something that's revealed about his psyche, in that like there's a world with no people, right? Or that the great works built by men overshadow people, and we see the opposite of that with Ozymandias by Percy Shelley, right? Um, and so all of his buildings, he builds a building, he builds a house, and then he tears it down. He builds one with cinder blocks, and then he's sitting there like under this umbrella, like a parasol, almost like he's in a 19th century, I don't know, like he's in a Cézanne painting or something, like watching this house being torn down. So it's for him, of course, what we read into this is that it's the beauty of destruction. It's a Yeatsian terrible beauty that he sees. Um, and then he builds another house. He builds this one out of wood. Um, Also, it's a little bit, I guess it's a little bit of fairy tale mixed in here because it's like Little Red Riding Hood. He's almost like a Little Red Riding Hood, but also, he's the wolf. And so he's like, or it's like the three bears, right? Or the three little pigs, right? He's sorry, I'm mixing up my fairy tales, but the three little pigs, like he builds one of cinder block, but it's in reverse. So he builds one of cinder block and he tears it down, then he builds one of wood, then he tears it down. And then the final house structure is, guess what? The house, who can guess, who hasn't seen this movie, what the final structure will be built of? Remember, he's had all of the people in the meat locker trying to arrest rigor mortis before he takes these photographs of them. Uh, Big points to the people who can tell what the house is going to be made of. If you can figure this out without having seen the movie, then I guess you've been watching the streams and you can figure out through artistic interpretation. Well, remember this guy's a satanic serial killer, so his structure is going to be made of people. It's made of people. So he was talking earlier about taxidermy, and he had taken like he did the most dangerous game earlier in the movie where he like showed this family, these two boys and a mother, like about hunting, and you think he's having this wholesome moment because everything he says is like a script. He talks like Bateman speaks music reviews in the book. Like it's scripted. Everything is perfect. There are no grammatical errors. There are no ums and ahs. And then he says, "Go on out on the range," and there's like a picture of a pig, and he kills the kid. He kills the kid, and then he makes the mother like feed the kid porridge when he's dead in front of him. And then he like does this weird thing with a smile. He taxidermies the body to make it look like a smile, right? Why so serious? And that is because there is one scene with a mirror. It's not a mirror shattered, but we see him in the mirror, and before he goes out, he says that he has to mimic what a person is like when they smile. And Matt Dillon is really an adept actor. This is a small thing in the movie that I thought was brilliant. This is like a testament to his brilliance in the movie, in that his face becomes this sort of mask. Acting and theater is really the manipulation of the body instrument. So instead of painting, it's like you're using your own body on the canvas of the stage or of the screen. And so when he smiles, it's like you believe that he has no concept of smiling except for the fact that it exists and people do it. Right? This is like there's no the neurons aren't firing in his brain that allow him human emotion. So and obviously they don't go into that really into the probably, psychosexual trauma that he goes through to make him like that. Because it's not really relevant in terms of the artistic vision of this movie. We just see the results. But that is, McGowan talks about that. And so he like does this weird smile, and it's like a demonic death mask smiling. But the way he does it is so absurd that it has some sort of humor to it. But anyway, the part that's not funny is when he stages the some of the victims that way so that they are in these little weird like sort of Texas Chainsaw Massacre Ed Gein scenes that he's recreating where he can be the god man, master of puppet style manipulating human beings as his props. So Anyway, so he opens the door and he makes the victims into this house structure inside the meat locker. Now, I mean, the way that this movie is done is almost like poetry in the sense that there aren't any extraneous aspects that I notice. Everything comes back. It's like the big spider web of literature, right? Where, in a poem, um, if you use a word, the word has to connect on a literal and a figurative level to other words in the thematic vision of the poem later on. Nothing can be extraneous. Everything has to be unified. It's unity and variety, right? So now we see why he's in the meat locker. It's not just for the literal reason, which is that he's trying to arrest rigor mortis and he has a place to store his bodies and his trophies. And he mentions trophies in the movie that he doesn't really take trophies, but he takes the whole trophy, right? But it's because what happens next will mimic where he ends up. The very last scene of the movie is of an ice skate, right? It's a frozen scape. It's cold, and that's because the ninth circle in Dante's Inferno is frozen. And the reason, remember that the reason, where's Dante's Inferno? The reason that it's frozen is because when Satan is cast down from in Dante's Inferno, as opposed to Paradise Lost, when Satan is cast down from heaven, he goes to the bottom of the world in a place that's so hot it's cold. It's an Arctic zone. It's a cold zone where everything is frozen in time, and where the heat of the pride of Satan's sin is what burns with the ever burning pinwheels of fire with reserved for those who commit the greatest sin in Dante's Inferno, which is that of treachery. So, of course, Judas and Brutus are in hell with Satan, right? And remember that at the end of Dante's Inferno, Dante climbs. He sees the like huge legs of Satan, like beastly pan legs, and he crawls up the legs, but then he ends up inverting and climbing down the body to the head. So everything it's like inverted world, right? As above, so below. And so when he escapes from hell, he climbs up Satan's head and then he makes his way to the back passage and then climbs back up into the forest. Well, in this, what happens is Jack has created a hellmouth, and the hellmouth is made of literal human bodies who were desecrated in the most obscene ways. And his negative conscience, his Verge, tells him escape through here, and he cuts a hole in the floor because the cops have come, and he can hear them banging outside, right? Which is like a reflection of some of the scenes in the Inferno. There's a scene in the Inferno and in the Aeneid where like you can hear again this auditory sensation. You can hear the screams of the damned, but they're distant. They seem close, but they're distant. And so we hear the stomping and the banging and the guns being cocked of the people trying to come in to because now they know that Mr. Sophisticato is is inside and he's got his victims in there. And so he cuts a hole in the floor and he climbs down the reverse ladder into hell. And some of this was like so well done in the movie because I know that part of it was filmed in the Cola ice world, right in the caverns, and it's like so Von Trier took Matt Dillon and Bruno down in. He took them spelunking. It's like the worst spelunking you've ever seen. It's like, oh, oh my gosh, you want to be spelunking with Lars von Trier? Hell no. That's where they are. They're in hell, and they're going through these passageways in this murky, disgusting water. There's a part where Matt Dillon says something about like, "I think I have an unpleasant feeling, Verge. I'm getting this sensation of like it's like acid in his mouth." Right? Remember in Point Break? I know you want to get me so bad. It's like acid in your mouth. Well, not this time, Johnny. So that's because he's coming to terms with he's gonna unify with who he is in terms of his it's not fate, he's made the decision to do this, but he's gonna unify in terms of who he's gonna be in hell, right? His soul is now in hell, and he's making his way through the filth passages of the Spelunk cave, and then there's that part where he sees the Elysian fields on the outside, and he actually a tear. He sheds a tear. So this is the only instance in the movie where we get something that's human, but for him it's too late. But there's no remorse here. It's no remorse. It's just the awareness that now he is damned. But he wants to be there. Right. So he keeps taking this passageway down into hell. And the last 20 minutes of this movie is so, I mean, it's so visionary. It's well done. Um, we see that the initiate on his Masonic journey through the underworld where he got there through the hellmouth, through the twin pillars of Yakin and Boaz, who are people in this. He's going down and he sees a bright light. He's illuminated, but the bright light is the bright light of the lava flow of hell, where he will be joined with the fire of his choosing, right? And they come to this part where there's a broken bridge, and the broken bridge is across the abyss. Now, this is pure, like this is Crowleyan, Miltonian, Dantean, um, satanic Goetia. This is the man comes to the broken bridge and he has to make his way across the abyss, right? Paranzan is waiting for him. So at this point, Verge, because he's on the verge, but he's also Virgil, says to him, I was tasked with leading you to this point, but he says he's in hell a couple of levels up. And he says, we can turn back. And then what does he say? What does Jack say? He says, no, I want to keep going. What's on the other side of that? Now he tells him that on the other side of that is the way back up to the world or to the forest, but because the steps are leading up. But you get this sense that for the first time, as just as he has shed his tear, that he is making a subconscious decision in his life, which is leading him to where he really wants to be, which is united with this lava in hell. Remember, David Berkowitz talked about one of the reasons that he, as the son of Sam, was interested in the occult and in these victims was because he said that he was promised by Samhain, son of Sam, Samhain, the demon that was talking to him, that once he got in hell, all of his victims would be his slaves. So that's sort of what Jack is doing here. And he tries to make his way along the chasm on the exterior and he loses his footing, hangs for a second, and then falls into the abyss. And when he falls into the abyss, he falls into absolute fire and flames at the bottom of the world, which is what Virgil tells him that's the deepest part of the entire universe. And it's also interesting that he's hanging there by his fingernails, and I I know that Lars von Trier said this thing about, like, that Hitchcock, said that, you can't leave the protagonist hanging by their fingernails because they don't care about somebody in the film when it's doing you lose there's a distance, there's a dissonance there between you caring about the protagonist and the fact that now they're hanging by their fingernails because that it's going to be all right in the end. They're going to survive. So in this, he kind of takes the reverse. He takes the reverse, and the guy's hanging by his fingernails, and he falls into the abyss, and then it ends with the frozen zone, right? So, um, I mean, it's so well done. Shouts out to Jethro for recommending this movie for sure. It's really good, and it's it's incredibly complex and layered. And so again, it's the house that Jack built in the title is the house of his victims, and it's the house of his own damnation, which he chooses to go into. Does that make sense? So I thought we would also look at a couple of passages from the Aeneid and from Dante's Inferno just to illustrate this. And remember, please, you can support me via super chats, dono chat, but also what's great is if you support me just right there with my links in the video description, in the channel description. Let's see. YouTube never wants to show me the activity where it's supposed to. Also, I need to give a shout out to Marshall Prospecta, who after the stream last time donated $5 and said, "Get yourself a pack of Cowboy Killers on me." So shouts out to Marshall for doing that. Really appreciate you, homeboy. Also, big shouts out to Ross, who sent a fat chat donation in and sponsored a stream coming up. And also for Ross for donating that 35, I think that's $35 Canadian. And he says, thanks for your intelligence and being an authentic person. Well, thank you so much. That's really kind. I really appreciate that. I hope I am an authentic person. So thank you so much for that. Really appreciate you. And let me look at donor chats before we get going. Please use the donor chat, but but please use the links that my beautiful, wonderful mods would drop in the. Yeah, you go. There you go. Jethro drops the PayPal link, so really appreciate that because that gets to me right away. So just a couple of things from Dante's Inferno here. Again, if you're going to read the Inferno, and you should read it. I'm not giving you anyone advice. I'm just saying people often ask for a book list, and I would say that my book list is the list of works that we've covered in the stream. I mean, I don't mean that in like a sarcastic sense. I mean that genuinely because that's one of the reasons for the channel in the first place is that I'm trying to do the works in the canon. And so you should start with the canon. Those are the works you could cover. And in fact, just go back um chronologically in terms of the channel and look at the first things that I covered. I started with Macbeth because I think Macbeth was uh a good groundwork for so many of the streams that we've done in the future. Not like that I had a plan or anything. I'm just saying I think that it was a great grounding because we're starting with Shakespeare. You should obviously you should start if you're going to read literature. Um, the greatest place to start is the greatest thing that's been written in English, which is the King James Bible. I mean, that's the foundation of English as a language. And then go to Shakespeare. Macbeth. I would start with Macbeth. Macbeth is one of Shakespeare's shortest plays, and if not his shortest, I said it in the stream, whatever it was, and just look chronologically, and then eventually you may get to the Inferno, and the Inferno is something that people should read. People may prefer to read like a prose translation of the Inferno because it's Italian. But I would recommend if you're going to read one, I would recommend Robert Pinsky's version. This is the all time. This is one of my all time favorite books, and it's so well done because the translation is not literal. It's done in the voice of a Pulitzer Prize winning um Nobel laureate. I mean, not Nobel laureate, um poet laureate of America voice in the voice of a poet laureate of America, Robert Pinsky. And I told you guys that I'd met him that time, and it's really well done. Even though it's not a literal translation, it's still in terza rima. He avoids. I mean, the rhyme scheme in the original Italian, this is the perfect example of form plus content equals meaning because the Inferno is written in something called terza rima, which means 3 line stanzas, and it goes the rhyme scheme. Not to get too esoteric or in the weeds here, but the rhyme scheme goes A B C B and so on, which means like 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. So you're not going you're not going all the way forward because you have to stop and gain your grounding and where you are because we're going along on this underworld trip with Dante and Virgil. So you have to watch your step continuously. So the steps are they're symbolized by the rhyme scheme in the terza rima stanza structure, if that makes sense. So I would read this. This is a great book. The language in it is incredible. And so I thought I would read. Let's see. He talks about the contrapasso. The notes are also voluminous, and he talks about, for instance, contrapasso. In keeping with contrapasso, fomenters of schism are cut apart. Other examples include gluttons chewed by Cerberus, spendthrifts scattered in the wood, the lustful buffeted about in the wind, with murderers broiled in blood. And one of the interesting things about the Inferno is that we don't murder is not the worst sin in the Inferno. It's treachery. The murderers are kind of way up in terms of the nine circles, and it also mirrors Virgil's Aeneid. But he says in Canto, let's see, Canto. Let me get to one of the last cantos here. It's written in cantos, so it's sung. It's like a poem sung, and each canto ends in a two-line stanza. And he says, let's see, this is page 299 of this book, Canto 34. He grappled the hair of someone climbing wood, so I suppose we were heading back to hell. Cling tight, for it is stairs like these, he sighed, like one who is exhausted, which we must scale to part from so much evil. Then he came up through a split stone and placed me on its sill and climbed up toward me with his cautious step. So that's the house that Jack built. That's the exact scene that's in the house that Jack built. I raised my eyes, expecting I would see Lucifer as I left him, and saw his shape inverted with his legs held upward. May they who are too dull to see what point I had passed judge whether it perplexed me. Come, the way is long. The road remaining to be crossed is hard. Rise to your feet, the master said. The sun is at mid tierce. We had come to rest. It's nothing like a palace hall. Instead, it's kind of a natural dungeon enveloped us with barely any light, the floor ill made. Before I free myself from the abyss, my master, I said when I was on my feet. It's hard to read because I've written over the entire poem. Um, Speak and dispel my error. Where is the ice? And how can he be fixed head down like that? And in so short a time, how can it be possible for the sun to make its transit from evening to morning? He answered me. You imagine you are still on the other side, across the center of the earth, where I grappled the hair on the evil serpent's hide, who pierced the world. And all through my descent, you were on that side when I turned my head, and legs about you passed the central point to which is drawn from every side all weight. Now you are on the opposite continent, beneath the opposite hemisphere to that which canopies the great dry land therein. Under the zenith of that one is the site whereon the man was slain, who without sin was born and lived. Under the zenith of the world is where Golgotha is, the man who was slain, capital M, the Son of Man. Your feet this minute press upon a little sphere whose rounded skin forms the Judica's other outward face. Here it is morning when it is evening there. The one whose hair was like a ladder for us is still positioned as he was before. That was Lucifer. On this side, he fell down from heaven. The earth, which till then stood out there, impelled by fear, veiled itself in the sea and issued forth in our own hemisphere. And possibly what now appears on this side fled its birth and rushing upward like a cavity, the hollow where we stand, there is below, as far from Beelzebub as one can be within his tomb, a place one cannot know by sight, but by the sound. There you go. There's the sound. By the sound, a little runnel makes its wends, the little hollow rock its flow has worn, descending through its winding channel to get back up to the shining world from there. My guide and I went into that hidden tunnel, and following its path, we took no care to rest, but climbed. He first, then I. So far. Also, the Terza Rima is because Virgil steps and then makes a step, and then Dante steps, and then Virgil steps, and then Dante steps, and then Virgil steps. So it's like he's following the steps of Virgil on as his guide through the underworld. So far through a round aperture, I saw appear some of the beautiful things that heaven bears when where we came forth and once more saw the stars. That's the end of the poem. Also, the stars there's a microcosm, macrocosm, cosmic effect to this poem because stars end the if it's the first canto and then they end the poem. Let's see if they end if stars end the first canto. Um, no, they don't end the first canto, but the stars appear at the beginning of the poem. And also because we're moving so that we can see upward, right? Yeah. So the part where let's see, let me read. There's the friar ball reference. We get to the ninth circle. Yeah, the ninth circle is in Canto 33, of course. Illuminate, confirm. abject pain, and body horror. So the canto occurs, and this mimics what Jack does in the film. It says, "Who could find words even in free running prose for the blood and wounds I saw in all their horror, telling it over as often as you choose? It's certain no human tongue can take the measure of those enormities. Our speech and mind, straining to comprehend them, flail and falter." The alliteration of the F sounds is supposed to be an expression of the exasperation of torture here. But also their onomatopoeia, because the sound mimics the sound of the whip flailing them, right? If all the Apulians who long ago mourned their lives cut off by Trojans could live once more, assembled to grieve again with all those stained by their own blood in the long Carthaginian war, rings pillaged from their corpses poured by the bushel, as Livy writes, who never was known to err, and they who took their mortal blows in battle, and those whose bones were heaped at Capareno, killed in the Puglian betrayal, and the soldiers massacred in the stratagem shaped by old Alardo, who conquered without a weapon near Tagliacozzo, when their army was trapped, and some were showing wounds still hot and open, others the gashes where severed limbs had been. It would be nothing to equal the mutilation I saw in the ninth chasm. No barrel staved in and missing its end piece ever gaped as wide as the man I saw split open from his chin down to the down to that place, and from the splayed trunk, the spilled entrails dangled between his thighs. That's Macbeth, right? Macbeth got that from Dante. I split him from the nave to the chops, he says. I saw his organs and the sack that makes the bread we swallow turn to shit. Seeing my eyes fastened upon him, he pulled open his chest with both hands, saying, "Look how Muhammad claws and mangles himself, torn down, torn open down the breast. Look how I tear myself, uh, like me." He says, "Schismatic and cleft, split open from the chin along his face up to the forelock. All you see here when alive, taught scandal and schism, so they are cleavered like this. A devil waits with a sword back there to carve each of us open afresh each time we've gone our circuit round this road while we grieve. Our wounds close up before we pass him again. But who are you that stand there, perhaps to delay torments pronounced on your false words to men? Neither has death yet reached him, nor does he say for punishment of guilt," my master replied, "but for experience. And for that purpose, I who am dead lead him through hell as rightful guide from circle to circle." So, in other words, he sees this demon down there, and the demon asks him, "Why are you here? How can you be here if nothing's happened to you?" And Virgil says, "Nope, I'm his guide. I'm here as his guide. He hasn't been condemned yet." But it's interesting that he talks about experience right there, because experience, innocence and experience play a role in this film in the discussion of Blake. And oftentimes it's weird that serial killers, especially in film, are obsessed with Blake. It's not weird. I guess it's normal uh because remember in Francis Dollarhide in Red Dragon is obsessed um with the Red Dragon. And we've seen this in a bunch of other streams that we've done. When we talked about it in Kari Mora, which was the Thomas Harris book analysis. Please go back and watch that. I thought that was a pretty good analysis. Um, but Blake is the Gnostic poet concerned with dialectics and duality. And so it makes sense that there's this Gnostic allegory journey in ritual to the path of illumination that these people are obsessed with. So I'm going to read you the tiger and also the lamb. So here's the lamb. This is the lamb. This is from his book Songs of Innocence. Now, the reason that he has Songs of Innocence mirrored against the Songs of Experience is because that's supposed to mimic dual nature, right? It's almost Zoroastrian dual nature, especially in literature, but of the soul for him. So the lamb, which has its mirror in the tiger and is mentioned in the film The House That Jack Built. The lamb says, "Little lamb, who made thee? Dost thou know who made thee? Who gave thee life and bid thee feed by the stream and o'er the mead? Gave thee clothing of delight, softest clothing, woolly bright. Gave thee such a tender voice, making all the vales rejoice. Little lamb, who made thee? Dost thou know who made thee? So notice there's a fearful symmetry there. In fact, there's just a reiteration of the original rhyme at the beginning of the stanza. Then he goes to the second stanza. It's also a song. It's supposed to be like a lullaby. Little lamb, it's a lullaby. And it's the lamb because the lamb is the lamb of God. And here, figuratively, is also supposed to represent innocence. Little lamb, I'll tell thee. Little lamb, I'll tell thee. He's called by thy name, for he calls himself a lamb, capital L. He is meek and he is mild. He became a little child. I a child and thou a lamb. We are called by his name. Little lamb, God bless thee. Little lamb, God bless thee. The mirror of that is the inverted mirror of that is the tiger. And the tiger is it's spelled people often ask like why people that ask, I guess, will often ask, why is the tiger spelled the way that it is? Because it's spelled Tyger because it's an archaic spelling of the tiger, because the poem is about the ancient nature of creation. So it uses the archaic spelling. So the tiger also, by the way, is the number one most memorized poem in the world, especially in terms of schools and kids. Like, and especially like I guess pre pre nowadays when when children in school still memorize poems. I mean, I had to memorize this. I had to memorize this poem when I was in like first grade for a thing at private school. We had to memorize a poem and then recite the poem. So here's the tiger. Tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forests of the night. What immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry? In what distant deeps or skies burnt the fire of thine eyes? On what wings dare he aspire? What the hand dare seize the fire? And what shoulder and what art twist the sinews of thy heart? And when thy heart began to beat, what dread hand and what dread feet? What the hammer, what the chain? In what furnace was thy brain? What the anvil, what dread grasp? Dare its deadly terrors clasp? So this poem is supposed to be the inversion of the lamb because the lamb represents innocence and the tiger represents experience or the predator. So that's why Jack in the movie sees himself as the tiger. And everything about the tiger is explained in this poem. You couldn't get a better vision of what the tiger means in terms of its metaphysical meaning, even in terms of a scientific description of the tiger than this poem. I mean, everything about this is about the tiger in terms of how it exists and in terms of what it means in terms of in creation. So what Blake is saying here is that while the lamb is the lamb of God, the tiger is the dualistic opposite, which is supposed to be this Luciferian creation of a predator. And we see that in the third stanza when we get the references to Hephaestus or Vulcan hammering away at his forge under essentially under the volcano, which makes the camouflage of the tiger. Does that make sense? So so um so like okay, so one other thing is the structure of the poem is different than the other one. It's split into four stanzas, and we get these four line stanzas, and we get a half rhyme. Now, the half rhyme in the first and the last stanza, they're supposed to, or sorry, in the first stanza, is supposed to throw the reader off. There's something odd and unpredictable about this, right? So, in other words, bright and night rhyme. We have a couplet there. It's not a heroic couplet. It's not a iambic pentameter Shakespearean couplet, but it is a couplet. And then the second two lines, I and symmetry. This is form and content. Equal form plus content equals meaning. I and symmetry rhyme on paper. They look like they should rhyme, but they only rhyme in the form of the poem, but they don't rhyme in the other half of the form of the poem, which is in the auditory sense. So again, we get the importance of sound when discussing how sound drives the serial killer, how auditory sensation and overload drives him. And the unpredictable nature of the poem, the unpredictable nature of the tiger are inherent in what Jack does in the movie because he purposefully, like he's writing his own poem as his life, he purposefully negates or throws off his obsessive compulsive disorder tendencies when cleaning up crime scenes. So everything starts to he starts that you would think that would be a loss of control, but instead it's like he's trying to find Ordo al Caio, right? Um, everything is ordered, and now he's kind of lost even that sensation, and he's pushing more and more. And of course, this is a degradation, and it's like a he is he's climbing down the 9 circles into hell, right? That's where he's gonna find his purpose and his order by wanting to be there. Of course, he's gonna be, pitchforked by the devil for all eternity, as Norm Macdonald says, but that's what he wants. Even notice even in this picture, um, he is it's like we see Virgil with his hands in his pockets because he is simply guiding Dante or Jack, but his hands are tied. He is not affecting his free will. He's just a guide. Whereas, and also notice the pocket watch. The pocket watch is a sort of a chain here. It's like he's also chained to this other character, just like he's chained to the underworld. But we also see Virgil here with his hand face, palm down because so below. Because now they're in hell. So there's no as above, so below here. They're just purely in hell. And that works with the vision of that Von Trier paints for us in terms of his cinematic canvas. Shouts out to Elias, who drops 4.99 super chat and says, one great thing I love about your live streams is my vocabulary broadens. Katabasis. Excellent. Let's go. Well, thank you, Elias. Really appreciate that. I think that all of our friends that do streams and our expert friends especially, we get that from them as well. So that's excellent. I mean, I when I think of the word Catabasis, I think of obviously of the descent into the underworld in especially in mythology, right? In terms of Greco-Roman mythology, but I also it brings to mind David Patrick Carey because David Patrick Carey has used that word, and so I remember that word kind of sets off a little ding in the old mind palace. Um, another image from the film, which I'll show you, which is really dark here, is the final image of Jack hanging on the precipice here on the promontory of hell, right where right over the abyss. Jethro says that's my favorite word. I use it so much. He's hanging over the abyss with his hood still on, the initiate. Notice he's also in black and red. It's almost Levian black and red here with the flames of the underworld beneath him. And look at that picture. I'm sure Von Trier meant this. That picture of Matt Dillon, it's like, are we using a stunt double here because it looks like another character, or is it another actor, or is it CGI, or is it just meant to look like he is now fully demon? Because his face looks demonic there. I mean, that is a demonic face. And he's hanging by his fingernails, but it's like his facial expression kind of says this is what he wants, right? He chooses in his free will to go into hell. It also gives me a sense of kind of I can't get my bearings because even though we're looking down, it's almost like we're looking up in the background, like he's almost flying upwards. So in other words, just like we saw with Dante, in terms of the geography of the ninth circle that Virgil was showing to him, up is down and down is up because you cross the hemisphere of the world under the zenith of Golgotha. So you have to climb down Satan's legs to get up or up to get down. You can't, uh, there's almost no logic to it, right? Matt Damon. Speaking of Matt Damon, I also watched The Bourne Supremacy or The Bourne Identity and The Bourne Supremacy today for like again the millionth time. So maybe it's just Matt Damon movies, right? Because The Martian, the Bourne movies, uh, Mad Max movies. Of course, Mad Max movies are based because that's they show us the post-apocalyptic dystopia with the guzzling wars that we're getting into. and the red cloud of death that hangs over the giant sand typhoon that they fly into, right? In Mad Max Fury Road. Fury Road also has its SJW elements, obviously, because Charlize Theron is supposed to be the female hero in this, showing the new order of things under the matriarchy in the movie. But nevertheless, it's a grand spectacle of a film. Uh, so he says, um, by the way, it's the forests of the night because it's supposed to be chaos, right? What immortal hand or eye? So it's illuminate confirmed eye because it's framing. He says frame as the verb because it's supposed to be in Blake's version or Blake's vision, the grand architect of the world who sets the world turning and creates the tiger here with this dualistic dichotomy. In what distant deep source skies? Now, God did create the tiger. God does create the does. God does create the tiger and does create man. But in Blake's vision, it's supposed to be a purely Gnostic vision. In what distant deep source skies burnt the fire of thine eyes is supposed to be, he's talking here, thine, he is speaking second person to the archetype of the tiger. And it's also thine, it's an archaic vision or version or language of the tiger because it's the tiger of all the world. So this is the kind of platonic form, world of forms of the original tiger. So he's not just talking about every tiger, he's talking about the original tiger, the first tiger that was ever made. It is mind-blowing. It is mind-blowing. It is incomprehensible. God's creation is incomprehensible in terms of that the tiger exists, right? How the lamb is made and then the tiger is made, and how could something so beautiful exist? We're blessed to be able to live in this world where such a thing we can witness such a thing, right? And when he says the fire of thine eye, it's because the eye is reflecting the fire of the forge where the tiger is created, but it's also the way that the tiger looks. It looks like flames. Its camouflage looks like flames. On what wings dare he aspire? What the hand dare seize the fire? Because the tiger, in its predatory movement, looks like it flies through the air. It's like Jim Carroll, the poet, said he'd rather be a cheetah than a chimp, right? Because it moves with a slow, sullen deliberateness. And also, when there's pictures of tigers drinking from the well, it's like when their ears pop up, the spots on the ears are supposed to mimic more eyes because the animal is most vulnerable at that point when it's feeding or when it's drinking, right? And so it's vulnerable. It has to be down on it, perched down on its claws to get close to the water. But the way that the ears pop up and have those spots, it looks like eyes watching. So it's always has this sort of safety mechanism. It's at the top. But it also, in a weird way, they kind of it's probably going too far, but in a weird way, they always remind me of wings. Maybe it's just from this poem. Um, what hand dare seize the fire? Because of the fire made in the forging of the tiger and the way that its paws look, right? What shoulder and what art? You think of the tiger, I think of the shoulders moving in this sinuous, slow, sullen, sinuous. It's what does he say? The sinuous rills. What's the sinuous rills from? Is that from Coleridge? It moves with this. It's almost like it's. I don't want to say serpentine because it's a tiger, but it's. I get an S sound at the movement of the tiger. It has some sort of slow, stalking, sinuous. It has these. There's some sort of alliteration in its movement. Um, and I think of the shoulders moving deliberately, right, silently. And what art could twist the sinews of thy heart? And when thy heart began to beat, the first tiger ever created, when the heart began to beat, what dread hand and what dread feet? So we get the entire description of the tiger, right? The way that it looks. Now we get the description of the creator of the tiger in Blake's vision, which is what the hammer, what the chain, in what furnace was thy brain? The furnace of, life is fiery with its beauty. It's incredible detail. What furnace was thy brain? In its deepest furnace of its brain, hunting, moving along, this thrill for life. And also the mirror of the in the poem, the kind of where the figurative moves into the literal in terms of it's created in a furnace, the way that it's camouflaged, it's like it's printed with the furnace of its creation. What the anvil, what dread grasp dare its deadly terrors clasp? I love how paws of the tiger are described as terrors. Shouts out to Frankie D out there, drops a $4.99 super chat, says, God bless. Come on, y'all, drop those super chats. Drop those super chats. Drop me a PayPal, Venmo, Cash App. Drop me a super chat. Please help me out. Help me out to get more books. Help me out in my analysis and to keep the stream going. Thank you so much for your support, everybody. Really appreciate you out there. Thank you to Frankie D and Elias and everybody who supported me out there. Thank you so much. So you know, you know that you are in poetic territory when or in the territory of a great artist when all of language is deliberate and nothing is extraneous and English is really made up of two parts of speech, right? We've talked about this before, but the nouns and the verbs. The verb is the most important part of speech because it's action, it's movement, right? Let there be light, action, creation, moving through life, the blood moving through your body, the heart beating, right? When you think about it in some sort of poetic terms, like let's think about it like in terms of the cosmos, not cosmologically, but in terms of the cosmos, we think of the sun represents the verb because the sun is constantly burning, it's constantly moving, it's constantly burning in its orb. And the planets represent nouns because they revolve around the sun's energy. They revolve around the verb in the sentence, and they are things. The planets are things. So all you need in a sentence is the noun and the verb. That's it. In fact, in its most basic form, an English sentence, you don't even need a noun. You just need a verb, right? Which would be like the invisible, second person command, right? Of like go. When you say go, well, it's an understood you. So we just need the verb. So it's really the verb that's the heart of a sentence. And you know that you're in poetic territory when when the poet has a grasp on that, his deadly terrors clasp. We know that strong verbs, I was taught my great teacher, Mr. Wood, in 10th grade British literature, taught me that to never use in sentences when I'm writing, to never use to be verbs. Okay. Now there's one great sentence that uses to be, but that is in the act of creation. And that's like the only one, right? That's biblical and that's God's movement be, creation be. But otherwise, for regular everyday people writing, the human beings who write sentences, um, to be verbs end up being lazy. And of course you have poetic license. So like with Shakespeare, his greatest, most famous line is to be or not to be, right? But again, that's because the to be in that is talking about what it means to be alive, what it means to exist, to be or not to be. That's the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, right? Or to take arms. This undiscovered country, right? What dreams may come. This movie actually reminded me a lot of What Dreams May Come, which is, the imagery in that movie. It's like a 1995 movie, I think, the Robin Williams movie, which is, the movie is whatever, but the imagery in that is pretty incredible, and it kind of reminds me of that because they also obviously took Dante's Inferno and Virgil's Aeneid as cues for going into the underworld in those scenes. But in that, remember, Hamlet is talking about what does it mean to exist? Does he want to obliterate himself? Does he want to never have existed? Does he want to knock himself off? What does it mean that his father, King Claudius, is no longer there? Claudius, I mean, not King, that's his uncle. I mean, King Hamlet. Hamlet comes and remember in the guise of this demon at the beginning of that, and tells him to take revenge. But you know, I mean, in that first stanza, the verb frame is it's a tactile, visceral verb. It's something that echoes movement, and that's a strong verb. So he taught me when I'm writing, especially in analytical, essay writing, to never use to be. And to this day, I try to avoid. I never used to be. When you're in conversation, it's different, but when you are doing a written analysis, it's completely different. So the final thing here. Oh, not final. I wanted to talk about Virgil's Aeneid real quick because I wanted to give you some imagery from that poem. And in the Aeneid, he goes down to in book 6, Aeneas goes down into the underworld. And so, if you guys don't know the Aeneid is the Roman epic poem. So all nations, one of the things that I think defines a nation. What is a nation? They talk about like coining your money and all that stuff. Well, in terms of what really is a nation, one of the things that defines a nation is to have an epic poem because the epic poem is the narrative story, the narrative in poetic lines in verse, right, written in lines, uh, that in of a hero who encapsulates all the virtues of said nation, right, and it's supposed to be a sweeping story that mirrors all of the various the geography, the climate, the location of the place where it is. Beowulf is the epic poem of England, and it's proto-Germanic and written in Old English, but it is the English epic poem. You could also say that Le Mort d'Arthur is the English epic poem because it's the Grail quest, and that may seem weird because the title by Mallory is in French, but that's because French was the language of the court. Um, I mean, Richard the First, Lionheart never, Coeur de Lion, right? For the Crusades, didn't speak English; he spoke French. But regardless, the epic poem of Spain would be El Cid, right, which is the Crusades. Song of Roland, same thing in France. Ancient Rome would be the Virgil's Aeneid. Greece gets, of course, the Iliad and the Odyssey. Um, what would be, Italy would be Dante's Inferno or the Divine Comedy. What would be America's epic poem? Would it be? I mean, I would say that "Song of Myself" is probably the epic poem of America, which is interesting, by Walt Whitman. But really, I mean, Harold Bloom would probably say. I can't remember if he said this explicitly, but Harold Bloom would probably say that actually Moby Dick would be the epic poem of America because the prose functions in that book almost like an Old Testament-esque prose poem. And the characters certainly, I mean, the narrative certainly mimics the American religion, right? In Bloom's words, which I agree with, which would be this kind of Gnostic Pentecostalism in terms of an analysis of the way that America works, right? So that probably, I mean, it's a great American novel, but it would be the epic poem. So book 6 of Virgil's Aeneid. This is a poem that is interesting because it was written at the time of Augustus Caesar, and um, what happens is uh, Virgil is one of the Trojans. Okay, and so it takes its cue. The past is prologue. It takes its cue from the Iliad. So during the Iliad, remember at the end of the Iliad, Troy burns and there are a few people who escape. One of whom is Aeneas. Aeneas escapes, has to make his way in an odyssey to another place to found his future people. Eventually, that will give birth to he talks about Brutus, and then also not Brutus from Julius Caesar, but the other Brutus, one of the first kings in Italy, and before that, Romulus and Remus. And so where he ends up is where Romulus and Remus are um, suckle at the she wolf, right? But in this part, in book 6, he goes down into the underworld and he sees the results of the Punic Wars and also of the Trojan War. And it says in book 6, line 11, but pious Aeneas seeks the peaks where high Apollo is king, and in a deep, enormous grotto, the awful Sibyl has her secret home. For there, the seer of Delos so inspires her mind and soul that she may know the future. And now they come upon Diana's grove, and now they reach the shrine, the roof of gold. Remember, Nam Sibyllum, the Sibyl is quoted as the epigraph to the wasteland because they're about to go into a wasteland. And um, the Sibyl functions as his guide here, just like Odysseus meets up with Tiresias, um, and Dante meets up with Virgil in the Inferno. Let's skip to that's the entrance to hell. The oracle begins on let's see, in book 6, line 77, but she has not yet given way to Phoebus. Remember, Shakespeare says in Much Ado About Nothing, but behold, the gentle wheels of Phoebus round about dapples the drowsy east with spots of gray. Phoebus, she rages, savage in her cavern, tries to drive the great god from her breast. So much the more he tires out her raving mouth. He tames her wild heart, shaped by crushing force. And now the 100 great gates of the house swing open of their own accord. They bear the answers of the priestess through the air. Oh, you who are done at last with those great dangers that lie upon the sea, worse wait on land. The sons of Dardanus will reach Lavinium's kingdom, for you can now be sure of this, and yet shall wish that they had never come. I see wars, horrid wars, the Tiber foaming with much blood. You shall have your Simois, your Xanthus, and your Doric camp already there in Latium, a new Achilles. Achilles is the hero of the Iliad. He too, son of a goddess, nor will Juno fail anywhere to hound the Teucrians. While you, a beggar in your need, implore the towns, the tribes through all of Italy, the cause of so much Trojan misery, again, a foreign bride, a foreign wedding. Do not relent before distress, but be far bolder than your fortune would permit. The first path to your safety, though it seem unlikely, shall yet be a Grecian city. Um, for if the fates have summoned you, the bow will break off freely, easily, but otherwise no power can overcome it. Hard from cannot help to tear it off. So that's where we get J.G. Frazier's Golden Bough, which is the great book of that inspired, Jessie Weston in her From Ritual to Romance, her analysis of the Grail lore and the Fisher King tied up with the Grail lore, and also of the kind of the what's the word? The sort of 20th century notion of which later became postmodernism is what I'm trying to say, right? The kind of movement through the broken landscape trying to find meaning, um, and anthropology. Um, so the Golden Bough is how Aeneas is able to gain access to the underworld in the Aeneid. When he gets to Charon, who is the ferryman across the Styx, he'll take him across, but he can't get back. But he shows him his magic token, which is the Golden Bough. The Golden Bough is the entrance into the underworld. He also has to present a gift to Persephone when he's in Hades, and Venus even comes down and gives him 2 turtle doves. Um, and so let's see. Later on, I made a note here in book 6. This is where Dante got Virgil as a companion. Um, he says in line 354, allow me by your power to disclose things buried in the dark and deep of earth. So he uses him as his guide. Um, and then we get the 9 circles of hell in book 6 also, which again were later taken by Dante. Um, you may yet recognize the spell. Let's see, line 550. These regions echo with the triple throated bark of the giant Cerberus, who crouches enormous in a cavern facing them. The Sibyl, seeing that his neck is bristling with snakes, throws him a honeyed cake of wheat with drugs that bring on sleep. His triple mouths yawn wide with rabid hunger as he clutches the cake she cast. His giant back falls slack along the ground. His bulk takes all the cave, and when the beast is buried under sleep, Aeneas gains the entrance swiftly, leaves the riverbank from which no one returns. Minos is the magistrate. Minos appears again in Dante's Inferno as one of the demons of the deep. And he says, Minos is magistrate. He shakes the urn and calls on the assembly of the silent to learn the lives of men and their misdeeds. The land that lies beyond belongs to those who, although innocent, took death by their own hands. Hating the light, they threw away their lives. Which is that's what the House that Jack built is about, right? He hates the light. He goes for his driving force is the negative light in the negative image of the photograph. He seeks out darkness, a sort of a bright darkness, so dark that the darkness is visible. That's why he goes into hell willingly. Um, but now they long for the upper air and even to bear want and trials there, but fate refuses them. The melancholy marshland, its ugly waters hem them in, the prisoners of Styx and its 9 circles. He sees Dido also in 2 stanzas later. Among them wandering in that great forest and with her wound still fresh, Phoenician Dido. And then he sees Anchises, which is one of the best parts of this book. Um, line 888, book 6, the Aeneid by Virgil. But in the deep of a green valley, Father Anchises, lost in thought, was studying the souls of all his sons to come. Though now in prison, destined for the upper light, as it happened, he was telling over the multitude of all his dear descendants, his heroes' fates and fortunes, works and ways. Fates, fortunes, works, ways. So on either side of the comma in the middle of the line, that's almost like a caesura in Old English literature. So we get alliteration, alliteration, unity in variety. And when he saw Aeneas cross the meadow, he stretched out both hands eagerly. The tears ran down his cheeks. These words fell from his lips. And you, have you come at last? And has the pious love that your father waited for defeated the difficulty of the journey? Son, can I look at your face, hear in return familiar accents? So indeed, I thought, imagining this time to come, counting the moments, and my longing did not cheat me. What lands and what wide waters have you journeyed to make this meeting possible? My son, what dangers battered you? I feared the kingdom of Libya might do so much harm to you. So in this part, um, the caesura, yeah, the caesura, spelled Caesura, is a line break in the middle of a line. This is very esoteric. Like it's a line break in the middle of a line of verse of Old English poetry. So you have, remember that a poetic line functions as a formed version of life. It's a lifeline. So every line of verse means to turn. Um, and so you get to the end of the line and you're turning onto the next line. And there's a form of poetry called a booster feeden, which is like the line works here and then it works backwards because it's supposed to mimic the idea of farming. So like you're farming your life. It's your lifeblood, right? You're farming your sustenance. So the poem is supposed to mimic that. But when you get to the end of a line of verse, that's the whole world. So the next line represents another world. You're constantly going into a new world. Everything is revelatory in a poem. That's why it's different from prose. Prose is much more chaotic. It seems to us like it would be much more formulated because we have paragraphs, and paragraphs are supposed to be the prose function of a verse stanza. But actually, prose is much more chaotic because it's words splotched onto a page. That's why the novel wasn't invented until, you know, the second half of the second millennium. They weren't writing novels. They were writing poems because the poem is supposed to be much more formed. So that mirrors the way that the lines of verse work in both the Aeneid and in the Inferno, and the way that Jack makes his way along the circles of the underworld. And it's called a caesura. The reason it's called a caesura is because it's named after Caesar, whose life is cut short right in the middle. There's a line break. There's a break in the middle. You have his life, and then there's a space in the middle of a line, and then it keeps going. Just like the Caesarean section is named after Caesar because he is supposedly um, from his mother's womb untimely ripped. They say in he said Macduff says in Macbeth, or that he was the first Caesarean section, right? So he is named after. So that the procedure is named after Caesar, which is an interesting correlation that would be that has with a line of verse, because that's the way poetry is. It's supposed to be these deep things, right? So so anyway, that's the Aeneid is we need to cover the Aeneid in its entirety sometime in the future. I'll probably get to the Iliad and the Odyssey before I get to that because it takes those as prerequisites. But now I've mentioned it. The other thing that plays into this film is Orpheus and Eurydice, which is from Edith Hamilton's mythology. And this is one of the classic books that I assume everybody read this in I mean, I read it in seventh grade, and I'd read it before that because I was interested, like a lot of dudes, I was interested in mythology when I was younger. I liked reading about mythology, like in picture books, even before I could read. And then I just love the stories of the Roman, and the Greek myths. And then eventually I read parts of Edith Hamilton's mythology. Then I read it in its entirety in seventh grade. And I've reread the book a number of times. But you should go back and read this book. This is the book on mythology, aside from Homer. And Orpheus and Eurydice, or Eurydice, Eurydice. I don't know how other people say it, but it's Orpheus and Eurydice. Is the story of the Katabasis again? It's the hero's descent into the underworld. And remember that um, this story is about how Orpheus is made the great. This is why poetry is associated with Orpheus, because it's Orphic, because he is endowed with the ability to sing poems, and he has a lyre, right? He plays a lyre, and he's in love with this woman. She's taken down to the underworld, and then he goes down to visit her, and he's told by I'm about to get back to it, but I think it's Persephone. You can have her as long as right before the portal back to the world, you don't turn around and check that she's there. You have to check. I mean, you have to make sure that you're faithful to my words. And of course, like a human being does, you turn around to make sure that she's there, and then he sees her taken back into the darkness of the abyss in Hades, and he loses her. Shouts out to Frankie D, who drops 4.99. This is great stuff. I wonder if I was daydreaming during this part of class. This is the first time I've heard what a verse and Caesar is. Great stuff. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate that, Frankie D. And I'm not, you know, I think it's important to go back to this stuff as adults, and that's why I love talking to I've got a grown up, high IQ audience here who appreciates this stuff. And even if you don't know about it, even if you haven't heard it now, I like sharing this because this literature, it's important to read. It's more important now than it's ever been. And we see the way that the world works, and we can gain an understanding of not only the way that the villains want the world to work, or want the world to work, but their archetypes and their paradigms, and we can gain our own understanding of the beauty of creation um, in our own worldview through poetry, right? Through poetry and literature and prose, and that's why I'm going through the canon. So I'm not here to teach. I'm just here to share this with you guys, and to analyze literature, and that's great. So thank you so much. Uh, Orpheus and Eurydice. This says the amount of the account of Orpheus and the Argonauts is told only by Apollonius of Rhodes, a third century Greek poet. The rest of the story is told best by the two Roman poets, of course, Virgil and Ovid. We need to go through Ovid's Metamorphosis at some point in very much the same style. The Latin names, Ovid's Metamorphosis is one of the great inspirations for Shakespeare. I mean, he took a lot from the history of the kings of Britain and the chronicles and all that, but also from Ovid's Metamorphosis. A lot of Shakespeare is just retelling of Ovid. The Latin names of the gods are therefore used here. Apollonius influenced Virgil a good deal. Indeed, any one of the three might have written the entire story as it stands. The very earliest musicians were the gods. Athena was not distinguished in that line, but she invented the flute, although she never played upon it. Hermes made the lyre and gave it to Apollo. Lyre, Lyre, is where we get lyric, right? Um, who drew from it sounds so melodious that when he played in Olympus, the gods forgot all else. That's why we get Apollonian poetry. Hermes also made the shepherd pipe for himself and drew enchanting music from it. Pan made the pipe of reeds, which can sing as sweetly as the nightingale in spring. The muses had no instrument peculiar to them, but their voices were lovely beyond compare. Next, in order, came a few mortals so excellent in their art that they almost equaled the divine performers. Of these, by far the greatest was Orpheus. A great movie, by the way, because we've talked about how The House That Jack Built by Lars von Trier is a kind of culmination in film for our modern eyes of Virgil's Aeneid and Dante's Inferno. A pretty good movie about Orpheus is the movie Orpheus Descending with Marlon Brando. And Amptown, I think it was Amptown earlier. Amptown, was that you? Amptown, it was Amptown, I think, who brought up earlier that Matt Dillon looks a lot like Marlon Brando. And it actually, someone said it looks like Marlon Brando and Anthony Hopkins instead of Matt Dillon and Bruno Gantz. And I think that there's something to that. I was actually yesterday when I watched the film, I was actually thinking about how Matt Dillon is probably the great version of the best of Brando because he's this kind of skulking character who's like um who just kind of sheds this like he's got this aura of being a Chad, right? But he's also it was Clontarf there. But he also has the kind of adept emotional response that's required when watching film. So he's kind of both. And we get that with Brando. We get it, I think, with Matt Dillon. So that's a good thing going on there. Shouts out to Crispy who says, "What's going on in here?" Nothing. We're just talking about some mythology. But is it Orpheus Descending or I think it's. Let me look it up. I might be confusing my movies here. I might be confusing it with The Fugitive Kind. Orpheus Descending. Is that Jean Cocteau? Oh, no. Okay, yeah, I'm confusing it with The Fugitive Kind. The Fugitive Kind with Marlon Brando, directed by Sidney Lumet. And we did Sidney Lumet recently. We talked about, I was on with Jay. We talked about the movie Network. Is a retelling of the Orpheus myth. Orpheus Descending is either Jean Cocteau or oh, no, it is a Tennessee Williams play, so Tennessee Williams has something to do with both of them, and that movie's directed by Peter Hall, and Peter Hall is the father he's the great British director who's the father of Rebecca Hall, the actress. So, also, before I forget, I will be on tonight at midnight Eastern Time, East Coast, Beast Coast time on, TNT Radio Live right here with our friend Joseph Arthur on his show and Ruckus from Boiler Room. And I'm not sure what we'll be discussing yet, but I was also on there last weekend. So check out my TNT radio bits. I'll be on there for, I think, the full hour starting at midnight. I was on there last week. Was it last week? I think it was last week. And we talked about Bob Dylan because I did the Bob Dylan stream. Please go back and watch the Bob Dylan stream if you haven't seen it, or go back and watch it anyway. I was also on TNT Radio Live on Thursday at 5:40 with Hesher and Lynn discussing the wildfires and all that stuff that's going on. And I was also on Alternate Current Radio Boiler Room on on the Boiler Room Rockfin with Hesher. Jay was there. Jay, Hesher, Ruckus, Grunt, Odd Man Out, Spoor, the whole Boiler Room crew, and that was really cool. So please check those out. So again, I'll be on TNT Radio Live tonight at midnight. Please check that out. And I did triple duty the other day. I did a stream. I did Maddie's stream over there at Digital Minefield, and then Boiler Room. I did and TNT Radio on that one day. Shouts out to Slow Boy Whiteboard out there who's listening. And so that'll be cool. Hope to keep doing those in the future. So, and please like and share the stream, you guys. Don't forget, and you can support me. Please support me via PayPal, Cash App, Venmo, all those things. This says next in order. Let's see. Next in order came a few mortals so excellent in their art that they almost equaled the divine performance. Here we go with Orpheus again. Of those, by far the greatest was Orpheus. On his mother's side, he was more than mortal. He was the son of one of the Muses and a Thracian prince. His mother gave him the gift of music, and Thrace, where he grew up, fostered it. The Thracians were the most musical of the peoples of Greece. But Orpheus had no rival there or anywhere except the gods alone. There was no limit to his power when he played and sang. No limit. Got that masterpiece. Got that masterpiece. No limit, baby. I can't sing the rest of it. Like me, there's no limit, baby. You know that song? There's no limit, baby. No one and nothing could resist him. Says, in the deep, still woods upon the Thracian mountains, Orpheus with his singing lyre led the trees, led the wild beasts of the wilderness. So he's kind of a Pied Piper figure, right? Everything inanimate and animate followed him. He moved the rocks on the hillside and turned the courses of the rivers. Little is told about his life before his ill-fated marriage, for which he is even better known than for his music. But he went on one famous expedition and proved himself a most useful member of it. He sailed with Jason on the Argo. And when the heroes were weary of the rowing was especially difficult, he would strike his lyre, and they would be aroused to fresh zeal, and their oars would smite the sea together in time to the melody. Or if a quarrel threatened, he would play so tenderly and soothingly that the fiercest spirits would grow calm and forget their anger. We see this again in Robin Hood with the character of Alan Adale, who is not in any of the movies, but he is the harper of the Robin Hood band. He saved the heroes too from the sirens when they heard far over the sea singing so enchantingly sweet that it drove out all other thoughts except a desperate longing to hear more. When they turned the ship to the shore where the sirens sat, Orpheus snatched up his lyre and played a tune so clear and ringing that it drowned the sound of those lovely fatal voices. The ship was put back on her course, and the wind spat her away from the dangerous place. If Orpheus had not been there, the Argonauts too would have left their bones on the Sirens' Island. Where he first met and how he wooed the maiden he loved, Eurydice, we are not told, but it's clear that no maiden he wanted could have resisted the power of his song. They were married, but their joy was brief. Directly after their wedding, as the bride walked in a meadow with her bridesmaids, a viper stung her and she died. Orpheus' grief was overwhelming. He could not endure it. So he's walking through the garden, but it's a fallen world garden, right? Where Orpheus is talking to the demon Greek gods. And the viper, right? Instead of the serpent, the viper bites Eurydice's ankle, kind of like the asp, I suppose, biting Cleopatra. We did Antony and Cleopatra. And it says, with my song, I will charm Demeter's daughter. I will charm the Lord of the dead, Hades. Moving their hearts with my melody, I will bear her away from Hades. So he's trying to be a necromancer, right? There's a lot of Merlin in this also, by the way. Merlin in terms of the Gretchen de Troyes, which is the actual, the origin of the Arthurian tales, kind of hints at this in his writing. And he says he dared more than any other man ever dared for his love. This is Edith Hamilton's mythology, by the way. Please read this book. This is a great book. Great book. There he struck his lyre, and at the sound, all that vast multitude were charmed to stillness. The dog Cerberus relaxed his guard, and the wheel of Ixion stood motionless. Sisyphus sat at rest upon the stone. Tantalus forgot his thirst, and for the first time the faces of the dread goddesses, the Furies, were wet with tears. The ruler of Hades drew near to listen with his queen. Orpheus sang, O gods who rule the dark and silent world, to you all born of a woman needs must come. All lovely things at last go down to you. You are the debtor who is always paid. A little while we tarry upon earth. then we are yours forever and ever. But I seek one who came to you too soon. The bud was plucked from the flower bloomed. I tried to bear my loss. I could not bear it. Love was too strong a god. O king, you know, if that old tale men tell is true, how once the flowers saw the rape of Proserpine, or Persephone. Then weave again for sweet Eurydice. Life's pattern that was taken from the loom too quickly. See, I ask a little thing, only that you will lend, not give her to me. She shall be yours when her year's span is full. No one under the spell of his voice could refuse him anything. He drew iron tears down Pluto's cheek and made hell grant what love did seek. They summoned Eurydice and gave her to him, but upon one condition, that he would not look back at her as she followed him until they had reached the upper world. So the two passed through the great doors of Hades to the path which would take them out of the darkness, climbing up and up. He knew that she must be just behind him, but he longed unutterably to give one glance to make sure. But now they were almost there. The blackness was turning gray. Now he had stepped out joyfully into the daylight. Then he turned to her. It was too soon. She was still in the cavern. He saw her in the dim light, and he held out his arms to clasp her. But on the instant, she was gone. He had slipped back into the darkness. All he heard was one faint word: farewell. So that's another Katabasis, Descent into the Underworld with Edith Hamilton's mythology. So thanks, y'all. Appreciate it. Thanks for that reading time of Edith Hamilton's mythology. Let's check out some super chats before we get on our way. And I have to get ready for the TNT radio spot tonight. Yo, shouts out to Evan T. Thank you so much, homeboy. Really appreciate that $20 PayPal. That is great. That helps me out so much. Really appreciate all your support. You're such a great supporter of the stream. Shouts out to Bert out there who dropped $10 on PayPal. Yo, really, really appreciate you. Thank you so much, Bert. You are a king. Shouts out to Jason, our homeboy Jason, who drops $10 via PayPal. Jason, you are a true king. You are an honorary basement breathalyzer. Thank you so much, Jason. Really, always appreciate your support. You are the best. Thank you so much. And again, shouts out to our homeboy Ross out there, who dropped a fat chat the other day for a sponsored stream on PayPal, and did it just the right way. Dropped that fat chat on PayPal. Really, really appreciate that. Thank you so much. And gonna get into that analysis soon. I think he wanted me to do something about Kubrick, and that's good because I got a whole Kubrick group of homeboys that I talk about Kubrick every week. So we'll discuss that, and I'll pick up the book and I'll work it out. Also, again, shouts out to Kristen for that $5 last time. Really appreciate you on Cash App. I'm sure I said that, but I want to say it again. And let's see. Shouts out to Buster last time for that $10 on Venmo. Really appreciate you. And Marshall Perspective also, who dropped a fat chat there. So let me make sure one more time. Let's look over at the super chats, and I'm gonna give everybody a shouts out here who dropped a super chat on YouTube. Yeah, so shouts out to Frankie D, who dropped $4.99. Great stuff, he said. Shouts out to Frankie D for that other $4.99. God bless. Shouts out to Elias for $4.99 super chat. One great thing I love about your live streams is my vocabulary broadens. Shouts out to Ross, who dropped those Canadian bucks, 35. Thanks for your intelligence. Really appreciate that. And I think that wraps it up, y'all. I think we're about good to go. So again, I will be back at midnight tonight, Eastern time, Beast Coast time. Shouts out, by the way, especially the biggest shout out of all. Thank you to Jethro, who is my supportive good friend, the king of the mods, and who got me to do this stream because he had recommended this film a long time ago. Jethro is so dialed in. Jethro is always dialed in, and has been talking about this movie for a long time. So if you want to know the inside info, just ask Jethro. I didn't mean for that to rhyme, but shouts out to our homeboy. Love you out there. Thank you so much. Yo, shouts out to Frankie D for another $9.99 super chat. Is there some kind of theme that you cannot try to grasp something too tightly and resist change? Also, an element of faith. This story really reminds me of Lot and the family who was told not to look back. Oh, Is there some kind of theme that you cannot try to grasp something too tightly and resist change? Yeah, I'll have to think about that one. I mean, the archetypal version of this in Western literature is obviously from Virgil and also from Ovid. Um, I think that this is one of the themes that plays into such works as the theme. The one that immediately comes to mind is Much Ado About Nothing by Shakespeare. And in mythology, it is supposed to be that you go with your fate, right? That you are, like, for instance, in the Seafarer or in some of the Anglo-Saxon poems that we've covered, it's about like, you know, it's no accident that even though they are literally Nordic warriors and they're Vikings and they're on a ship and he's a seafarer and he's riding, this ship, that it's on the wave of life and that it's supposed to represent his faith. But in that poem, it's interesting because it's a crossover into Christianity, right? We've got a newly Christianized Viking group, and he writes his poem about this sort of conflation of fate, fate, destiny, and free will. So he uses the two, in the poem. They're not interchangeable, obviously, but he uses fate in a sort of a different sense. In mythology, it's pure fate. It's like the gods have fated Orpheus to do this, and he cannot grasp things too tightly because he's only human. In Much Ado About Nothing, which has Greco-Roman or maybe just explicitly um, Roman themes to it, because it's almost like the Bacchic rites occur in the play. Um, what that brings out is the thin line between comedy and tragedy. Because Hero and Claudio are in love, and Hero is the girl. She's the daughter in the movie in the play. Hero is in love with They're in love with each other. Claudio's recently returned from the wars, and Don John, the villain, who's a Byronic hero in the or a Byronic villain in the play, sets up a kind of a weird midnight climax fake blackmail operation where he uses somebody that looks like there's somebody that looks like the characters, and so when one of them goes up, they think that they're cheating on them. And then she's told to fake her own death, and then when Claudio goes up to her tomb, he will kind of Roman style, like, I mean, just like with with Aeneas and Anchises, he is supposed to make sacrifices at her tomb, but they're not literal sacrifices. He's just supposed to wail at her tomb and, like, sort of sacrifice his love because his love has been sacrificed. She's killed herself. And then that will prove that he loves her. And then she can reveal herself from the chasm, just like Orpheus is supposed to take Eurydice from the abyss. So she comes back out of the tomb and she takes off her mask and her veil and she's alive and all's well that ends well, in Shakespeare's words. Different play, but same sentiment. So, in other words, it's supposed to be that you there are things that are bigger than you that you're supposed to give into, um, or let them be, right? Obviously, this is a thing with this is you know s- this shows the how humans are supposed to avoid hubris, right, in God's world, in the Bible. That, you know, we don't have control over creation in the sense that we can, we're here for a brief time, right? I know I'm not trying to speak, theologically. I'm just saying, like, with a view towards literature. I'm not the expert. I'm just saying that, you know, we all live in the world and we know that, people want. I think that's one of the great things that, or one of the big things that's come about, especially in postmodernism, is that we have this illusion of control over everyone and everything, and that it drives people to anxiety. Well, you need to get rid of your anxiety. Easier said than done, but get rid of your anxiety, right? You can control yourself and your free will and how you're supposed to live your life according to God's teaching, but um, we can't control other people in terms of we don't have, this. We're not the judge. So I think that's an astute question. I'm gonna have to think more about that. Frankie D drops 4.99 and says, "There's this lyric by the Lumineers. It says, I read my script and the costume fits, so I'll play my part. And it has always stuck with me." Well, that's one of the I hate to bring up Macbeth again, but it's just because it's just so true. Um, why do you dress me in borrowed robes? Right? Which is which was played on in The Emperor Has No Clothes. You have total control, but he has no control. And eventually he has such hubris that he thinks that he is, in this narcissistic thing that he thinks that he has clothes on and he's being lied to, but he's naked. And we see him bare for what he is. Um, but in Macbeth, it's that there's this motif of clothing that appears that like the clothes don't fit, right? If the shoe fits, if the crown fits, then it's supposed to be right, right? The glove don't fit, right? So I'm saying that we live in a society. Yes. Yeah. So thank you so much for the super chats. Thank you so much for the support. Again, that was Edith Hamilton's Mythology, William Blake, Songs of Innocence, Songs of Experience, the Aeneid by Virgil, Dante's Inferno. And next time I will be getting into Ken Kesey's One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I can't wait to cover this, y'all. You're going to be, I mean, this book just, it blows you away. I read it first time in like 1995 and I just reread it again. And it is mind blowing how much this is a Ewan Cameron, Jolly and West, Manchurian Candidate, MK Ultra, psychic driving hell book. And it really gets to what the mind warping of electroshock therapy and all these things, and the spirit of the old America versus the NWO, um, the man versus the sheeple. And so I think this is going to be a good one. So please check me out when that comes out. God bless everybody. Love y'all. And shout out again to Rooks G. Rooks G is our he's our guy, he's our friend, and he made the music that you heard at the beginning and that I'm about to play you out with. Play you out? What does that mean? Play us out. Play us out. What does that mean? Play us out. All right, go, go. And here's Sting and cut off his new album. Write it and we'll do it live. Shouts out to Rooks G. Please go to his Instagram, his SoundCloud, his YouTube, ROOXG, and sometimes ROX.G. He is our friend, and he is awesome. He makes great drum and bass and jungle. Yo! One last super chat out there. Shouts out to Crystalline, who that just came through. Shouts out to Crystalline, who drops Fat Chat $50 on Cash App. Crystalline, you are the best. Thank you so much. Really appreciate you. That means so much to me. Y'all, it's summertime. It's summertime. Summertime. And just sit back and unwind and unwind. Want to hear more? Summertime. Will Smith. What else do you want me to sing? Shouts out to Kristen who drops $50. Really appreciate that. Thank you so much. So to play us out, if you want to support me, you can do that anytime in the links in the channel description, video description. Please, if you're watching, you haven't subscribed, please do that. And thanks to everybody out there. Thanks to everybody for coming by. And you will hear me. I won't see you, but you'll hear me in 2.5 hours on TNT Radio. So to play us out, here is Rooks G and Sleepless Malls. Rooks G, ROXG. Let's go. It's our homeboy.